Class, since we've been speaking about marriage, we're going to talk about communication in marriage, which is a big issue. So this is another thing where we think if people could communicate, if we could communicate telepathically, Mary and I would probably be out of a job because, 90% of marital problems result from miscommunication or something. I mean, I just made up that 90% statistic, but I'm sure it's pretty accurate or close to being right. So why is communication between spouses such an issue? Why is it such a prevalent problem? As a neuropsychologist, I am more than happy to explain this scientifically. So that's a brain. The actual human brain does not have a hand in it. Nor are things different, labeled. There's no writing in your brain, but basically that's what your brain looks like. There are two hemispheres, right, left and a right hemisphere, and they're connected by this thick band of fibers called the corpus callosum. You've heard lots of pop psychology about right brain, left brain stuff, and I'm just going to go ahead and arrogantly say most of it is bunk. A lot of it is way oversimplified and has been reduced to some pop culture things. But the fact is, we have two halves of our brains that are responsible for different things, and the way the brain grows between men and women is different, and so it causes differences in communication. The hemispheres of the brain are what we call lateralized. In other words, each hemisphere is responsible for different functions, okay? In 98% of all human beings on the earth, the left hemisphere of the brain is lateralized for language. In other words, that's our expressive language, our receptive language come from the left hemisphere. And the right hemisphere is lateralized for non-language functions, visual spatial functions, perception of shapes and interpretation of non-language auditory input like music and things like that. So that's been in a reductionist way changed in pop culture to your left brain's the logical, systematic side of your brain. The right brain is the creative side. So a lot of that is way too simplified. But the fact is, your brain, the hemispheres of the brain have different functions. That's called lateralization. Now here's the difference, the first difference between men and women. Women lateralize earlier than boys. Girls lateralize earlier than boys. In other words, in the neurodevelopmental trajectory, little girls, their functions, the hemispheres take up their respective functions earlier than boys. Does that make sense? That's why the smartest kids in class when we were little were the girls. And that's why in 33 years of working with kids, it's my opinion that we shouldn't even send boys to kindergarten until they're 7. What's the point? Their little brains are still lateralizing. And it's for this reason, the early lateralization of the female brain, that I was only the second best reader in 3rd grade. And Eileen Robb was the best reader. Not that I hold a grudge. But Eileen, if you're out there listening to this, I will have my revenge someday. So I had one person that was a better reader in 3rd grade than I was, and it's because her little brain had lateralized already, right? Boys, however, in the long run, men lateralize more thoroughly. In other words, when everyone becomes an adult, men think with either their left brain or their right brain, whereas women think more globally. And hence think differently about things and are sometimes smarter about things. Now, men resent this. So we've come up with a term, a mystical term to describe it away, and we call it women's intuition. That's just men's a word we came up with to make men feel better about why we're not as smart as women. But the fact is, men lateralize more thoroughly in the long run and tend to think either with their left brain or their right brain, where women think more globally. How does this affect marital communication? This is a graphic representation of the differences between the male and the female brain. As you see, men's brain is compartmentalized. Most of it is devoted to sexual thoughts. Here's your ball sports center. Here's your extremely large part devoted to dangerous pursuits. An extremely small section of the brain dedicated to aiming at the toilet. According to my wife, I don't even have this part of my brain. Nor do I possess the domestic skills cell, which is only one cell, I believe. TV remote control, we have an abundant function in our brain. That's men. Avoid personal questions at all costs. In some men, this takes up the larger portion of the hemisphere. Now, in the women, large capacity for headaches and an even larger capacity for choosing choose. They have an impulse shopping center that men don't have. And along with the deficient toilet aiming cell, women have a toilet cleaning cell. Driving skills is devoted to an extremely small part of the brain and a large I told you so gland right here. So this basically depicts the differences now between the male and female brain. If you look at the footnotes, under man's brain, the listening to children cry in the middle of the night gland is not shown due to its small and undeveloped nature. It's best viewed under a microscope. Under the women's brain, the footnote is the put oil into the car and be quiet during the game glands are active only when the shiny things and diamonds factory has been satisfied or when there is a shoe sale. So that is basically my scientific discourse on the difference between the male and female brain, and it's all right there. No, I'm kidding. Now, in truth, the way the differences in lateralization, it's true. Men tend to compartmentalize. When men think, because they're lateralized more thoroughly, they think in modes, right? So men are either in work mode, hobby mode, sex mode. Every once in a while they're in dedicated to my wife's need mode, but that's rarely infrequent. Rarely do these sections in men overflow or intermix because we're so strictly lateralized. Women, on the other hand, as I said, think globally. Therefore, everything that happens in the mind of a woman influences everything else in the mind of a woman. They think more globally. So, those of you who are married, do you think about this? You ever come home, if you're a man, and you say one simple, innocent thing, and you get the tidal wave. The Hurricane Harvey washes over you, and it's a tirade, and you're like, what was that all about? What was that all about? I just said one thing, and I got the whole tidal wave. It's because your poor wife has been stewing about something all day, thinking about something that may be totally insignificant to you because you compartmentalize. Now, keep in mind, as the next point says, there's a big difference in the purpose that communication plays for each gender. So women communicate to promote closeness and intimacy. That's one of the functions of communication for the female. They talk about their trouble so that they can solicit empathy. Men, if they communicate at all, it's to transmit information. It's for a purpose instead of engendering intimacy. Does that make sense? So men don't care about all that other stuff. We're just trying to communicate information. So men, be honest, when your wife has a problem and is upset, what do you try to do? You fix it. You try to fix it. That's what we do. Because we're thinking with our left hemisphere, we're compartmentalizing. We want to fix the problem. But what does your wife need you to do? Listen. And I wanted to go on record that a man said that. A man said that. We're making great strides here already. Now, on the other hand, women think that if men just offer a solution, they're trying to dismiss your problem. That's not true. Men are doing that because it's what we know how to do, out of desperation. So once again, women share information to establish intimacy. Men have to understand in communication that this is kind of a ritual, this establishing intimacy. So men, when their wife is into the male mind going on and on about this problem, and you're trying to offer advice and fix it, but it doesn't seem to be helping anything, and she's going on and on to tell you about the problem, it's part of this ritual. And she ends up feeling like you don't care about her. But that's not true. You know, men love their wives, and they do care about them. It's just your problems we don't care about. So, no, I'm kidding. So women, this is the moral of the story. Women should not expect what's neurologically impossible, which is for husbands to be girlfriends. That's biologically and neurologically impossible. So intimate talk between girlfriends should remain just that. And I urge you not to put your husbands in that same position because it's hard for them to do that. This underscores the importance of women having friends that are other women so you can talk and establish intimacy. Men have to understand that when their wives are doing this thing, this talking about the problem, not quite responding to your multiple recommendations of how to fix it, she's trying to connect. It's a ritual. She's trying to connect with you emotionally. You can't discredit it. You have to listen. Periodically, nod your head. You know, if you position yourself in a certain way, you can still see the TV. So that's good, if you do that. I'm sorry. Okay, Mary's telling me to move on. There is an interesting study, if you look at point 3. On average, men speak 12,500 words a day, while women speak 25,500 words a day. So you got to figure when a guy goes to work, he uses up probably 12,495 words. What's he got left? What's for dinner? That's 3 words. And good night. So that's how he uses his remaining 5 words, right? So men tend to communicate facts. Women tend to build intimacy. Women maintain eye contact for 12 whole seconds at a time. It's been shown 12 seconds, while men do so for only 3 seconds. 12 seconds of eye contact versus 3. Men are capable of talking for longer and making eye contact when they work at it. This is what I'm urging the husbands to do, is to work at making more eye contact, to work at communicating more intimacy. My advice for women is to pick your times a little better on when you try to communicate with your husbands. My wife, God bless her, when we're in the middle of the working day, it's, you know, she is focused on work. We've been in practice together all this time. We go out to lunch together, and sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get her to talk because we're busy. However, when she likes to talk is at the end of the day, that last hour when we're relaxing on the chair watching TV, and I finally managed to slip myself into the plot line of a story, and that's when she interjects her thoughts and feelings. So what's the solution? We have to make times to do this. Once again, it falls on the heads of the household to make sure we have special times of non-distracted communication and intimacy, where we are not distracted men by our work and our jobs and our hobbies and things like that, and can focus exclusively on our wives. So it takes intentionality is what I'm saying. So now I'm going to give Mary an opportunity to embarrass me.
Before we move on with communication, there was a question that came up during the break, and so let me just clarify one thing I said in the last class. When I was talking about wives helping their husbands spiritually, I wasn't talking about spouses not dealing with sin, all right? That wasn't what I was talking about. I was talking about not nagging your husband, okay? That's what I was talking about, is it's not your job as a wife to nag your husband to do something that you think he needs to do spiritually. But if there's sin in your household, that needs to be dealt with, okay? So let me back to communication. In addition to all this neurological stuff that Michael was talking about, the other thing that affects our communication styles is our past, the families that we grew up in, our families of origin. You know, if you think about it, you know, most children are totally verbal somewhere between the ages of 2 and 3. And by the age of 5, children pretty much have the functional vocabulary that they're going to use for the rest of their lives. I mean, they add words on and things like that. But by 5, kids pretty much have the basic vocabulary that they're going to use. Where do you think they learn that from? You know, it's from mom and dad and brothers and sisters, or whoever's in the household, grandma, you know, whoever's living in the household. You know, not only did we learn our communication, our verbal communication from our families of origin, but we also developed what psychologists call the internal working models of attachment. And what that means, that's a big psychological term, that means that the way that you were treated by people in your family of origin is the way that you expect to be treated by other people throughout your lifespan. That's scary, right? I mean, how scary is that? You know, that should put a lot more oomph in our parenting to know that, you know. So what I'm saying is the families that we grew up in, our families of origin, have a huge impact on our ability to communicate. And most of those are very unconscious. We don't think about them, you know. We just say things the way we say things, and we don't always connect them back to where did that come from, you know. So you know, you marry somebody else from another family of origin, and unless you spend some time thinking about those things and talking with each other about them, it's just going to happen automatically, and it's not going to be the same. You know, with Michael's and my family, just talking on the telephone, his family lives in upstate New York, and, you know, in my family, if somebody is angry with you about something, you're not going to hear it directly. You may hear it 3 years from now from a cousin, kind of, you know. That's kind of the way, I mean, that's about as direct as that communication got in my family. With his family, they talk every weekend on the phone, and they'll get on the phone with each other, and I'm so mad at you because of this, you know, and I'm shocked. I'm shocked. I mean, in my family, that conversation would involve a shotgun somewhere, you know? But in Michael's family, and then they have a little argument over the phone, and they hang up, and everybody's fine, you know? So you see what I'm saying? You know, you have very different ways of communicating and dealing with things. And unless you spend some time kind of going through that and sharing that with your spouse, it's gonna unconsciously affect your communication. Let me just talk about some very specific family situations that can significantly impact a couple's communication with each other. You know, if you grew up in a family where there was alcoholism or substance abuse, you may have learned to avoid problems at any cost. You know, the elephant in the living room, right? All right, we'll talk about everything else, but we're not going to talk about dad's drinking ever. You know, you may have learned to keep peace at any price. You know, I'm not going to do anything to upset anybody. You know, or you may have learned that the only way you get heard is when you get really angry. You know, that anger is the only way to communicate strong feelings. You know, the same as if you grew up with a family that had a significant emotional disturbance. You know, you may have grown up feeling like emotions are scary and dangerous. I know I saw a sister whose mother had schizophrenia. And so she very much felt like, and she was about to get married, she very much felt like expressing any kind of emotion or showing any kind of emotion was just this powder keg that was ready to blow up, you know, because in the home that she grew up in, mom couldn't handle it. Mom could not handle it. You know, you may, if you were a child in a home like this, you may feel like my feelings are not as important as the other person's feelings, you know, because their feelings are so big. So I don't have to say anything about my feelings. You know, if you came from a family that was disrupted by divorce, you may feel like arguments can't be solved. You know, that arguments are going to result in somebody leaving. You know, there's a very frightening book called The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce, and I can't remember the author's name right off the top of my head right now. But this was a psychologist that took children whose parents were divorced, and she followed them for 25 years. So it's a longitudinal study. And the first result she got, you know, she was looking at the kids in high school and college, and those results looked very good. You know, the kids seemed to be doing as well as their peers. They were doing well socially. They were making good grades. They were making career choices. Then she followed them on out to where they were establishing their own marriages and families. And that's where they hit the wall, because they didn't know how to solve a problem. You know, they thought every fight was going to end in somebody leaving. That's what they thought. or that if they had a fight, that meant that the relationship was over with. That's where that began to show up. So if you're from a family like that, you've got to learn how to fight fair and learn how to get help to resolve problems. You may not have ever seen that in your home growing up. Maybe you grew up in a family that just didn't communicate much at all. Like I said, my family was not good at, we were good at if everything was rosy and everything was fine, we were good at talking to each other. But if there was a problem, we weren't good at talking with each other. My extended family, my father's side of the family, are all from East Tennessee. And I don't know how much you know about men from East Tennessee, but they say about 25 words a year. And if you're not there when they say them, you've just missed it because they're not going to repeat it. There wasn't a lot of communication going on, So that may have been part of the problem in your family. So with these kind of differences, how can couples learn to communicate better? The first thing is you've got to be aware of the differences, like we talked about. You and your spouse have got to talk some about, this is what happened in the home I grew up in, and this is what we need to do differently, because otherwise I'm just going to fall back into my natural way of communication. You can't do the mind reading thing, where you go, well, he should have known that hurt my feelings. If you didn't say to him that hurt my feelings, he didn't know that hurt your feelings, okay? We're two psychologists. We don't have any idea what the other person is thinking. There's no mind reading going on, okay? So you've got to communicate clearly your thoughts and when your feelings are hurt and things like that. Proverbs 12, verse 5 says, the purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. Michael made mention a minute ago about making special times to communicate with your spouse. We're busy people. I don't care where you live or who you are or what your family constellation is like. We are busy people. And if we're not careful, our communication in our home becomes just dealing with logistics. Who's going to pick up Billy after ball practice, and what time is church tonight, and what do we need to get at the grocery store? If we're not careful, that's all we are talking about all day long. So we've got to make time as couples, as married couples, we've got to make special times where we're talking on a more heart-to-heart level. We're talking about things that are going to deepen and improve the relationship. Like I was saying, when we, for a long time, we had a house full of little kids. And one of the smart things we did when we had a house full of little kids is we had a very strict bedtime. Everyone went to bed. If you're not bleeding out of your ears, you're going to bed at 7 o'clock. We don't care, all right? So we trained our kids to go to bed. And what we would do after the kids went to bed, when they were little, is we had kid cookies for the kids, and then we had special Pepperidge Farm cookies that we kept up in a high cabinet where the kids didn't know or couldn't get to them, So this is when we were younger and we could pull this off. So when the kids went to bed, we made a pot of coffee. At that time, we didn't stay up all night. We couldn't do it now. And we got our special cookies, and we sat down, and we took 20 or 30 minutes just to talk about, how are you doing? What are you worried about? How are we doing? Every day. We had to do that when we had a house full of little kids, because otherwise we weren't talking to each other much. So figure out what's going to work for you. When are you and your spouse going to get this time to communicate? You also need date nights sometimes, or you just get away from everything else. Michael knows nothing will fix me up like a moderately priced hotel room, right? 2 nights in a moderately priced hotel room, and I am fine. We're going to be fine. You need those times that are just building up that marriage relationship. The other thing is, as couples, we don't need to have anything that's a taboo subject. There should be no taboo subjects in our relationships. Now, all of us are going to have rough subjects, okay? Things that we know we have a hard time talking about as spouses, whether it be children or money or jobs or, whatever, all right? That's when we need to go to other godly couples and get help. That's when you call somebody else in the church and say, we need you this week and talk about this, because we can't work it out ourselves. We cannot work it out ourselves. We've got to get help with that. But those are the very areas, those taboo subjects are the very areas that we need to delve into if it's not going to negatively affect our relationship. You know, the last thing about communicating with your spouse is make it fun. Make it fun. You know, I mean, Michael and I have been married for going on 34 years, right? Long time, okay? So we know a lot of stuff about each other, but we don't know everything about each other. And Michael is great about coming up with these silly topics of conversation. You know, if you didn't look like you, what actress would you rather look like? You know? I mean, it's stupid, but it gets you communicating. It gets you knowing that person in some way you may not know that person, you know? So you've never gotten to the point where you know everything about that person. You don't. You know, so be creative about ways to communicate with your spouse.
Trying to remember what other fun, one time I asked her, of all the cartoon women in the world, who's the best looking? Because I'm always a Betty Rubble kind of guy, but, you know. So I don't know, it's just something to talk about. I think that's actually very critical to ask. Now, we have to talk about a special area of communication that's particularly detrimental to marriages and families, and that's anger. And the first thing to understand is this, we had mentioned it before, the tone of the household. The way a couple communicates with each other sets the tone for the household. So whatever the kids are exposed to in terms of parents communicating with each other, that's the lowest level of that they'll sync to as well. So the way we communicate with each other, especially in the presence of children, is extremely important. And there are couples, I don't need to remind you, that set a tone of anger in the family because they communicate mostly in anger. So the first thing we have to understand, because it's in the Bible, we have to understand that there is no force in the universe below God that's more powerful than the Word. That's why there's so many scriptures about taming the tongue and so many proverbs about the harm that can be done with the word. So we have to understand that. Knives and bullets can wound a body, but that can be repaired sometimes. The things that are injured with a word are sometimes permanent or last a really long time. I've decided there's no thing on the planet more fragile than the human ego, you know? I've learned that from being a psychologist. There's no piece of china, no human hair is more fragile than the human ego. And you can say things casually that have an impact on a child for a long time. So we've really got to ride shotgun on that. Proverbs 25, even a gentle word can break a bone. Depends on the content of what you're saying. So with that in mind, we have to talk about anger. Once again, Jesus got angry, but only about two things: when people mistreated each other or when they mistreated God. Those are the only two things he got angry about. What do people get angry about? When they are feeling personally attacked or when they're inconvenienced. That's usually what perpetuates angry talk in humans. So, Jesus' anger was always righteous and other-focused. Our anger is always selfish-focused. We tend to get angry when we feel inconvenienced or mistreated or attacked. So it's for selfish reasons. And we rationalize it that way. That's how we rationalize when anger. We say, I've heard parents in the office many times say, well, anger seems to be the only thing my kids understand. Until I raise my voice in anger, they're not paying attention. Or if my spouse would do right or do what I want, I wouldn't have to get angry. So we're quick to rationalize why we get angry. But if you think about it, our anger is always for selfish reasons, never for righteous reasons, like it was in Jesus' case. Now, here's the problem. Anger causes, as far as I can tell, there are three and only three reactions a human being can have to anger. In the first one, the person will do what you say and obey what you told them to do in anger, but they'll be resentful. They cave in out of fear, and they do what you said out of fear. The other reaction is the person shuts down. Now, this, like I said in the slide, this is the most common reaction of teens. I call it, when I'm working with parents in my office, I call it the valve. Your child, your teen, in his or her head has this valve. When you start telling that child something in anger, that valve shuts off and the teen says, there you go, my parent is obviously certifiably insane or criminally insane. I don't have to do what he or she says. You see? You see how angry he or she is? He or she is off his or her nut, therefore I don't have to obey. They shut off that valve. I see it all the time. So I work with parents in the office about, look, as soon as you respond to something in anger, that valve shuts off and you're going to get ignored. That child's going to shut down. So either the person will cave in and obey but resent you for it, the person will shut down, or the worst case scenario is anger gets met with anger. When that happens, we've got a who's going to dominate this angry discussion, and it escalates, especially with men who try to be the alpha male. So I'm angry at this child. The child responds in anger. I don't want to lose my alpha male position. I'm going to get angrier and angrier. And it's a self-perpetuating problem that sometimes ends in violence. So you can gain nothing, I tell parents in the office, nothing by communicating in anger. You will gain nothing. You might get obedience, but it'll be resentful obedience. So we have to ride shotgun on anger. That's why Ephesians 4, it should have been a scripture. It should have been a slide, but it's not. So I'm going to tell you what it is. Ephesians 4, 31 to 32 says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger. Forgive and be compassionate because that's what Christ did for you. Once again, it's going to be hard to overcome our natural instinct for anger until we keep in mind that that's what Jesus did for us. We have to help people fight their own rage. As we're working with families in our congregations, we've got to help them fight their own rage when they're angry. There's no place for rage or anger in the house of God's holy people. Now, what's the alternative? We tell them. They say, it's hard for me to not be angry or to react in anger. Well, what's your alternative? You keep doing what you're doing, and you're going to have more of this that I'm showing you up here. You're going to raise a family full of angry, resentful, shut down, or violent children. So once again, there's no magic. There's no, I'm not a big believer in anger management classes. There's no magic thing except your desire to please God is going to be the only thing that will make you ride shotgun on your own rage and anger. To not do so, this is what you're going to end up with. In my clinical experience with non-Christians, they can learn to overcome their rage and anger if they have the incentive to do so of the court. So I've seen plenty of dads who, under threat of never seeing their kids again, or under a temporary protective order, who magically overcome their anger because they risk losing everything, but it's an external compulsion by the court. Or when they've hit rock bottom. I've seen non-Christians kind of repent of this when they're this close to losing everything, when they're about to lose their spouse, they're about to lose their children, or their jobs, or anything else that their anger has lost for them on their behalf. Under those circumstances, I've seen non-Christians turn around and overcome their anger. They seem to magically be able to do that. But the people, I can tell you from experience, that have the most success at overcoming anger are Christians, because we have a higher goal. They fear God, and they have the Holy Spirit to help them. That's how Christians overcome anger, and they are accountable to other Christians. So once again, we have an advantage that non-Christians don't have. When we want to once we're convinced of the detriment of anger to our family, we can overcome by calling upon the Holy Spirit, by fearing God, and by asking other disciples to hold us accountable. Otherwise, no magic technique to overcome anger. No model of therapy can help you overcome anger. Just God and His Word. So at that, we're going to take another break and reset for our continued streaming video, about 5 minutes. Thank you.